Welcome, everybody, to this interdisciplinary lecture series and seminar, which is an old tradition that we have at the Academy. But what is new is that it's also streamed, so it's a sort of public lecture at the same time. In our seminars, the tradition is that we have a speaker who talks about a topical issue, and after that, students ask questions. And I have some students noted down already who will get preference in asking their questions. So Bondi, normally this lasts all in all about 45 minutes plus 45 minutes discussion. And let me now introduce Professor Bondi. For, of course, the DA students, there's no necessity because he's on I think 14 or 16 years, one of the most popular professors at the Diplomatic Academy and the kind of heart of our African studies, the international relations of Africa. He's a brilliant teacher, so you will only get the kind of flat screen version of it. So the students saw him already last year, so they know the full face-to-face experience, which is fascinating. He's one of the great experts on African international relations worldwide. He is professor of political science and international relations and vice rector of the University of Yaoundé. He studied in America and in Europe, in the UK, in Cambridge and the London School of Economics. His PhD is from America. He has written many books and articles, and as I said, is one of the most demanded experts in that area. He gives a talk in this seminar on Africa every year, I'm glad to say, normally face-to-face, and I'm glad that at least via the internet we are able to have your talk this year. And of course, it will be topical, so it's COVID-19 in Africa. So we all look forward to your talk. Please, Professor Bondi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor Nordek, for this very kind introduction. I hope that you hear me well. I hope so. And I wanted to warn the students not to believe all the nice things that you said, because you said them because for the last 16 years, we've been friends. So I'm happy, I'm happy that our friendship continues after now 16 years. I'm really delighted to see you. I'm delighted to be in the context of the diplomatic, and you know that it is an academy which I cherish particularly. It's a great privilege for me to talk about a topic, which is the COVID-19 and Africa. What we're going to do today is, first of all, to start with the figures, because the figures are somewhat controversial also. And I think it's important to have the magnitude of the kind of ravages this pandemic is causing to the entire world. So I will start with some figures just in order to paint the whole situation, and then I will talk specifically. I must say that here we hear about pandemic 24 hours a day. I hope it's different for you in Europe, because it is very depressing after a while. So we can say that concerning Africa, the date when the pandemic started is very easy to remember. It was on the 14th of February, 2020. As you know, the 14th of February normally is Saint Valentine. So for us, it was a kiss, not a kiss of love, death. unfortunately. It's easy to remember when it started, and also it started in Egypt, a North African country. What are the figures around the world concerning worldwide, the worldwide situation? If we look at the South Morning China Post, which was the first newspaper to give the situation in China. It started in China on the 19th of November 2019 was the first recorded. Since then, around the world, confirmed cases have been to the tune of 5,500,000 people who have been contracting the disease. Recovered 2,200,000 approximately. Deaths 350,458 around the world. These are the World Health Organization statistics. In Europe, arrival date of the pandemic officially is the 21st of January 2020. Confirmed cases 1,800,000 people. Death 170,000 people dead in Europe. In the United States of America, arrival date is January 2020. Confirmed cases 1,720,000. Deaths a little above 100,000, and recovered 475,000 people. So this is the situation in Europe, in the United States. And now, what about Africa? The confirmed case, 119,000. The number of deaths recorded is 3,592, and recovered 48,000 people. So we can see that there is a big difference between the figures which I gave and the figures which I have just provided for Africa. There are many people who tend to doubt those figures, but I must say that they have been sent through the CDC, which is in Addis Ababa, the Center for Disease Control, which is in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And they cannot be sent there if they have not been validated through the World Health Organization. So that is the normal procedure, even though some people put that in doubt, okay? Now, having given all those figures, I think it's important for us to ask ourselves a few questions. Why the discrepancy between the dynamics which we see in Europe, in America, and Africa? Because it is clear that with 3,592 deaths, I can say only, you can compare that with what occurs in America, where in the span of only 2,000 people who die. So it means that there is what is happening. I don't have all the answers, thankfully so, because if I did, I'm sure that I would be nominated for the Nobel Prize in medicine, in psychology, in sociology, and in everything else. So I don't have the answers. What I do have, certainly, are questions. What can account for this difference which you see between what occurs in Africa today and what is happening around the world? First of all, it's important to stress that there's a lot of controversy. What we heard is experts from the European experts is that it is only a matter of time before Africa becomes the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic. It was only a matter of time. Other newspapers were writing on their headlines, the worst is to come for Africa, and so on and so forth, which were not very comforting for us. But so far, statistics tell another story. Statistics suggest another dynamics. And whether you think that the figures have for 55 countries to modify and give wrong statistics, 55. So something is happening. The question is what is happening? And I would suggest 3 points in my answer. The first point is to examine the health profile of Africans. What is their health profile? What is the individual's history in terms of medical care or medical profile? Is it the same as the one which we see and observe in Europe or in America? The second point I will deal with is the demographic. In other words, how many older people do you find in Africa? How many older people you find in the rest of the world, especially in Europe? You will see that the demographic curve or pyramid is totally different when you examine Africa or when you examine Europe or America. The third and last point will have to do with the local pharmacopoeia in Africa. In other words, the biodiversity which you find in our forests for millennia, which have been there for centuries and centuries. Nutrition of the Africans today does have different factors, have something to do with what we are observing. That is a question mark. So now, with your permission, I'm going to go back to these different 3 points. Number one, the health profile of the Africans. It's important to understand that all African children, and I'm insist on that point, have been vaccinated against a couple of illnesses which should be indicated. All African children have vaccine which is anti-tuberculosis. All of them are vaccinated against the cholera. All of them are vaccinated against the yellow fever. And all of them are vaccinated against malaria. So it means that at least these 4 vaccines are compulsory. All of us have to have it. We who are in sub-Saharan Africa, I'm talking about, not necessarily northern part of the continent. I'm talking about the sub-Saharan Africa. So you will not see an African who has a health profile, who has lived in Africa, a disease called malaria. So our gene dealing to fighting on a daily basis with malaria, tuberculosis, yellow fever on a daily basis. So I don't know whether that creates antibodies or not. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm just asking the question. The second aspect is the demographic structure of Africa. In Africa, half of the population, and the continent's population today is 1,250,000,000 people. I repeat, 1,250,000,000 people inhabit the continent of Africa. Half of those have years old of age. half of them, which means that the continent is the youngest continent on Earth. Whereas when you take America, America is relatively younger than Europe. You will see that the number of older people, that is to say those who are beyond 75, is only 10% in Africa at the most. And yet when you look at the pandemic, unfortunately, those who tend to die are those who are relatively older people. So I'm not saying that it is an explanation, but it is a factor which needs to be taken into as what is happening in Africa. The third factor or criteria which I selected has to do with local pharmacopoeia and nutrition. What I call pharmacopoeia is a system of health which is purely traditionally African. We tend to use roots, we use ginger, we use garlic, we use many oil, locally derived oils, which we inject and which we eat even on a daily basis. In Europe, it is taken in a folkloric fashion. It is taken of archaic approaches to health. But the truth of the matter is that the health system of Africa, the traditional health system of Africa, has been there for centuries, I would say even for millennia. It has sustained the African population because in 1960, you had 250 million Africans in 1960. Today you have 1,250,000,000, which means that more people have survived than have died. So the health system is not so catastrophic as to allow for such a huge increase in terms of survival. And so our pharmacopoeia, that is to say, the biosystem, the biodiversity of Africa, which is found in our forests, in our savannas, in our ecosystems, help us to sustain ourselves and to find the kind of medicine which we need from our tradition in order to continue to live. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would think that these three factors are to be taken into consideration when we analyze what is happening. So I want to finish my talk by saying that I've heard many people, they say no, what is happening in Africa is and so on, because there's a lot of promiscuity in Africa. My take is this: it is true that there is promiscuity in Africa. Confinement is very hard, very difficult to achieve in Africa because our societies are very socially active and conviviality is the name of the game. Therefore, it's difficult. It's extremely difficult for us not to touch each other, to greet each other, to embrace each other. Is very difficult. Be it in the northern part of a continent or in the southern hemisphere of a continent. It's very difficult. But this is precisely the reason why it is difficult. Number of deaf people is more difficult to hide, which you find in Africa than elsewhere, because everybody knows everybody else. If there's a death in a quarter of Yaoundé or Nairobi or Kinshasa or Algiers, it will be known. It is not possible to hide it. Therefore, when those people say the figures are not correct, the bodies will be lying all over the place in Africa very soon, and so on and so forth, this has not occurred yet. And I think most people, for instance, in my village, nobody has died there. In my region, I think know a few people who have succumbed, but it's difficult. People are dying in the thousands in a society where everyone knows everybody. So what I'm trying to say and what I'm trying to argue is that we don't know why the pandemic is not yet taking full stream in Africa, but we have a few explanations which stem from what I've tried to gather and to present to you. I'm not saying that the situation today will remain as such. No, there can be an acceleration very soon. We hope not. But many people around the world, it seems, are eager to see Africa join. We see that as a morbid interest. We've seen, believe it or not, newspaper headlines, why Africa has so few deaths. Why is not Africa yet in the same range of deaths as we? And so on. I suggest, ladies and gentlemen, that this is not very serious. This is not very ethical to wish that there should be more deaths. So it seems to us that the situation could deteriorate in Africa. This is not to be excluded, but so far the COVID-19 has been more or less contained. Made now, because we are confining people now. School again will start next Monday. Only God knows what will happen. Because in the mind of many Africans, unfortunately, the pandemic is about to be over. That's what they think. Of course, they are dead wrong because it's not the case. So we don't know for the next month what will happen. But Africa has been in it since February, which is nearly 4 months now. And the catastrophe which was announced for Africa yet to occur is yet to materialize. So this is what prepared for us as a discussion. And I'm sure that there will be many questions because it is a matter of a lot of questioning what the pandemic is doing to Africa or is not doing to Africa. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm ready for any questions you might have. Please, as I always say, don't feel embarrassed to ask any question you want to ask. Thank you so much. The floor is back to you.
Thank you for your great talk. I mean, you see, you are adapting to the technologies. I could hear most of it very well. The technology is also that one should be short, and you have been short and very precise. I mean, I think your explanation is very plausible for me. About the age structure was quite obvious, but the other two that I learned were not so familiar to me. So I've learned something, and let's hope that it will mean that the situation will remain better in Africa, unlike some people who, in a kind of Western view, say it will be much worse in Africa because the health system is not as technically refined as it is. But as I say, I always thought that your approach probably sounds more plausible. So let's start the discussion. I mean, you have already invited Mr. Murad, so please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Noydek.
Yes.
Thanks, Professor Noydek, and thanks, Professor Pondi. I have two questions regarding the what some commentators call the African exceptionalism in the face of the pandemic. As you mentioned, it's very far away from the apocalyptic predictions of the WHO. You gave us some insight, the health profile, the demographics, and the pharmacopoeia. My question is, the first one, does COVID-19 have the potential to be a trigger for regional scientific and political cooperation as a factor of African integration, since, I mean, given the common specificities? And the second question on economic terms, several countries in Africa rely on rentier economy. And COVID-19 has reduced massively the fossil fuel exports and consumption. And do you think that it's also a chance to finally get out of the rentier system and an opportunity for the continent to diversify economically?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Murad, for your questions. Times of crisis are time of pain, but also are times of opportunities, I think. The two fall in that category: drastic time for change and opportunity. Regional scientific cooperation, yes. But when you listen to Western media in general, they never report what is happening in Africa. There are academies of sciences all over Africa, and they are now trying to look for ways to design medicines that address the COVID-19 pandemic. But it is never reported from what I have observed. But I know, because even if you take the of Cameroon, only last week there was a paper produced where a lady called Professor Ngong Jean, she produced a paper where she listed 184 different species of trees that have roots that can help. She didn't say that it cures. She said can be involved in the COVID therapy. So such things are not recorded, and I can understand, because of course there's a big stakes, which is economic in all this. The continent or the firm that will find vaccine is for billions and billions of people, which translates into billions and billions of dollars. So I think that that's aspect to it. Now is now being put together, and I think that at the level of a continent, it should be coordinated by the African Union, which should take its responsibility. My suggestion is that rather than have individual countries fighting it out, it's better to have a platform of African research which can be coordinated by the African Union. Now, the second thing, the second aspect had to do, I don't remember very well. The second
aspect was more, yeah. Thank you for your first response. The second question was more regarding the rentier system and the impact of the COVID on the economy of rentier countries.
Yes.
And if you think that's the opportunity for the continent to get out of, to be more diversified economy.
Yes, because one of the problems with confinement, for instance, is that the fragility, the precarious nature of African economies is such that most people, most consumers live on a daily basis. They cannot therefore make economies and then keep and save either goods and consumer goods and so on. So they live on a daily basis. They compute and they go to the market from Europe, where you usually go to the supermarket. That's why confinement was supposed to do more harm in Africa than it would be in different settings. Now, we should leave that kind of economy, which is subsistence economy, I agree, to go into more, I would say, large-scale production economies, and have the economies that produce the food that we need, and not just the food which we export. I think this is the best time to do so. I agree. Yes, I thought I saw a hand which was down here. I think Diana? No, maybe it was a mistake.
Yes, actually, I have a question on, thank you, Professor Pondi, for your presentation.
Yes,
my question has to do with this, and though you didn't mention anything regarding regimes using the COVID-19 as a crackdown to,
I can hear you, but I cannot see you. Okay, go ahead. I'm listening to you.
Okay, so my question is, in your opinion, how should the African Union, the regional economic communities, the regional economic communities deal with the fallout as some regimes use the novel pandemic to crack down on legitimate protests against their political and economic failures. In the case of Guinea, Burundi, Tanzania, Uganda, Malawi, all are calling for elections.
I'm not sure. How can the African Union?
I'm talking about, you didn't mention anything about, regimes in Africa. African leaders using the COVID at their advantage to hold on to power. And I'm asking your opinion on what the African Union and other regional economic communities in Africa can do about the fallout of these regimes, as in using the novel pandemic to crack down on legitimate against political and economic failures.
Now I understand better what you are saying. I think that there comes a time when we must become serious. We're talking about loss of life, massive loss of life. We should stop politicking, petty politics of low level. I think that we must rise to the challenge. It is not time to instrumentalize the pandemic for personal reasons. This is, in my view, I'm afraid, a crime to do so. We must look at the interest of a population which is already suffering enough so that we don't add insult. In my view, we must concentrate on the health dimension, the best responses we can bring in terms of mobilizing capital, first African capital, then worldwide capital, but in order to address one problem, the health situation of Africa. Those who try to instrumentalize it by, I think, politicking, to me is a wrong approach. This is not the time for it. This is not even the place for it. And I think it will be badly perceived by everyone. That should be condemned, in my view. Okay. Yes, I think Diana wants to say something.
There's Mr. Makokic.
Oh, okay. Mr. Makoki.
Hello, I'm actually Makokic. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Thank you for your talk. I think it was very interesting. I have a question regarding the relationships between the European Union and the African Union in the times of the COVID-19 pandemics. Well, I will start here. The European Union has recently reached a new African strategy, and the aim is basically to redefine the relationship between both continents and to build an equal relationship between both continents. And I'm asking myself, well, in the COVID-19 pandemics, the social and economical cleavages in the world seem to have intensified. And against this background, I'm asking myself, is building an equal partnership a utopia, or is it a possibility? What would be your take? I mean, I have an opinion on that, but I would be interested on your take as somebody who has a profound insight of things. And the second question I would have is the fact that actually we have now in 2020 the election year in Africa. And an example has been Burundi, where due to the COVID-19 pandemic, external election observers have been denied the entrance into the country. And many external observers are now fearing that this might strengthen authoritarian tendencies in African states, and some are even doubting whether results were legitimate. And Yes, again, my question would be, what is your take on that? Will the COVID-19 pandemic also impact authoritarianism in Africa? Also against the background, we will have the elections in Niger, in the Ivory Coast, which has been the stability factor of Africa. And last question I would have, we know that Africa is a continent where many military conflicts remain unsolved, unfortunately. One example is the Libyan crisis, the crisis with Boko Haram in northern Nigeria, and not to speak of Somalia and the regime instability there. And my question would be, where do you see the challenges and opportunities for external and local peacekeeping efforts? So I know this has been much, but I would be thankful for your insights.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to say that these are many questions, but I think they're pertaining to the same preoccupation. In other words, the link between the new possibilities for relations between Europe and Africa, and also the new domains of these relationships. I would be very, very frank and very candid with you to say that the appeal here in Africa is a bit of a condescending approach. When we talk about the COVID pandemic, 19 pandemic, we feel that still the scheme that Europe or the West have all the answers, are the center of things, are the reference which no one can escape from. The idea that we must conform to a model which is unique. That idea appears to us to be used. When you take the medical approach, I would like to give you a figure many Europeans don't know. Out of 10 Africans today, 2020, only 3 go to the modern medical infrastructures to be cured or to be taken care of. It means that 7 never go there. It means that 7 out of 10 will rely on what we call an alternative medicine, in which they believe more than which they don't know at any rate. So what for Africa, in the eyes of most Africans, not all, but most Africans, cannot be in the respirators, for instance, because when you listen to the big professors of medicine in Europe, in America, they say Africa has so many problems because they don't have the correct equipment. This is a totally wrong approach, because only 30% of the Africans will need respirators. 70% will never set foot in a hospital. Therefore, don't know what a respirator is. Need to use it anyway. You hear people in Europe say beds, and therefore they will be in trouble. The problem is that the majority of people never use beds to start with, as far as their health needs are concerned. So what I'm trying to portray here is that we are not talking about the same perspectives. And the idea that we need exactly the same kinds of tools, approaches, medicine to cure us, our people, our population, is not at all proven. And I think when you listen to the big professors in most universities, they think that everyone should conform to them. The case at all. So if we see things that way, that the perspectives are not exactly the same, then the cures and the way to deal with the pandemic cannot be unilateral. There's no one way of dealing with that. It's hard to understand. It's even hard to accept for many people in the West that there are people who don't need the kind of material which are seen by you as absolutely indispensable. It is not for the majority of people here because they don't know that medicine. They don't believe in it. As you know, the medical act has a lot of faith in it. In order to be cured, you must have who are dealing with you and know that they know what to do. In fact, the majority of people here don't go to the kind of hospital which you and I know, because these hospitals do not exist in their environment. They've never been there in their lives. So we must factor that in our analysis and be more humble, not think that we are the center of the world and everything else, Africa is but a diminished prolongation of the West. Africa is a diminished part of the world which ought to be like us, but which unfortunately is not like us. And therefore, there's a lot of things to be filled. As long as we reason in that way, it will be different. You must understand that we have an alternative medicine. It may be right, it may be wrong, but it does exist. Just as the Chinese have an alternative medicine. You may like it, you may not like it, but it's there for thousands of years too. Those medicines do exist. Will they be used today to address the pandemic in one way or the other? This is precisely what is happening. The results are there, one way or the other. But I think it is the attitude that must change. Africa or Latin America or Australia are not a peripheral part of Europe. They are not a distorted part of Europe. Totally different. There are points of convergence, of course, but there are also points of divergence. It's normal. So I think that if we have that new philosophy, which accept each other as being able to find local solutions to global and also local problems, I think things will be better and easier for all of us. So I'm aware that what I'm saying may shock some of you, but I think that it is the truth. And that's why you even have people here who doubt that there is a pandemic. Of course, they are foolish to doubt it because the pandemic is extremely dangerous. But it's just to tell you the extent to which there are whole villages where they've never heard of it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Wehmeyer.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fondi. So I actually do have two questions. My first one is, so what do you think of the lockdown measures taken? And I'm particularly referring to measures as taken in South Africa, where they, for example, placed a ban on the sale of alcohol and cigarettes.
And where?
In South Africa, where there is a ban on alcohol and cigarettes. And my second question is about the future of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So trading was actually supposed to start on 1st of July, but now the deadline got postponed, and I'm wondering what the future will look like. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Thank you for your question as well. And I want to thank everyone else who asked a question before. I didn't say thank you, but all the same, I thank you, all of you, for your questions. Now, in South Africa, it's been a rough way of applying some of the measures the government has taken. We saw them on television. Banning alcohol, banning smoking of cigarettes and so on. I think it is normally to the best advantage of the population. And I don't think that it will be there forever. They should be there for a short time. The time to think. If people know that these are just periodical measures. They're not structural. I mean, they will not be there forever. I think if people are told that, they will adhere to it more easily, I think. But I think they are necessary it's necessary to change the behavioral patterns of populations if we want to obtain results. Now, concerning the free zone chronogram, that is to say the unfolding of the different phases, it's clear that it has to be put on hold. Everything has to be put on hold today. Cup of Nations, which was supposed to be held in Cameroon. No greater disaster to tell Cameroonians that there will be no football games. It's a disaster, but it is a necessary disaster because you need to save lives, not to take risks that will create thousands and thousands of deaths. Only irresponsible decision makers can go ahead when the situation is so sad and so sour. So I think that we have to endure the difficulties, but the earlier and the deeper we abide to these measures, the faster we'll go through this pandemic. So I think that it is necessary to understand that. To me, it's normal to reschedule everything, wait until normalcy before we start our activities, our daily activities. This is a time of crisis, and crisis from the Greek meaning means a time of unusual change and unusual circumstances. That's precisely what we are facing today. Thank you.
Okay. Before we come to the next, if there are more questions, I've seen that one has been sent from Ms. Waldner Markov about this malaria drug that President Trump is taking, and she was wondering whether Africans are taking this in large quantities and whether that might be responsible for the better performance of Africa in that respect.
Well, President Trump is free to take all the medicine he likes, of course, but we have lived all our lives with the malaria scourge on us. There's no African who has not felt the malaria disease, especially south of the Sahara. I'm not sure about, because even the figures you have makes a difference between north of the Sahara and south of the Sahara. But all of us here have had to deal with malaria, and therefore chloroquine is something we take almost on a monthly basis. So you see, this is why our genes have, in fact, inherited since we were born. Or Americans, these are new drugs, but they are anything but new to us. We are accustomed to them. So good luck to President Trump. He believes that he's doing something good, but I'm not sure that everyone agrees with him, starting with his own medical doctors. But I think that he likes to do exactly the reverse of what everyone expects from him. So I'm not surprised that he would go further and going on doing that precisely because people say that he should not.
Well, are there any additional questions that I don't see a raised hand, but oh yes, I see a raised hand now. Yes, Ms. Lecour.
I have a question, and my question is in relation to the 3 points you talked of earlier. So I'm just wondering, as Africans, should we be concerned, like should we have a major concern over COVID in relation to the 3 points you talked of earlier?
Yes, I think that we should not think that we are out of trouble. It will be a very mistaken appraisal. It will be a mistaken conclusion. I think that so far, so good for us, relatively speaking. We must not think that this is the time to unleash our constraints and then start business as usual. I think it will be the major mistake to do today. Instead, be mobilize to make sure that what we have, we consolidate, and we explain to people that these are bad times to go through. But if we are disciplined, I believe more in self-discipline than discipline. If we are self-disciplined, we will go through it with relatively few damages. But I think that we are not out of the situation, the bad situation yet, and we are not out of possible bad surprises if we don't take the situation as seriously as we should.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
I think it's fascinating that we have here a global experiment, basically, a virus which attacks pretty much everybody in the world, and different systems react differently. They have different policies. If you think of Sweden, for example, in Europe, or they have different setups, health systems, and so on. So in the end of the pandemic, we will probably see which ones adapt best to it. And there's a lot of talk about China, but Africa seems to be doing pretty well so far too. So maybe, I mean, there's one thing, if science doesn't know a lot about something, like this new virus, then in the West, we listen even more to experts. Interesting thing, we don't listen to experts in periods which are normal, when experts really do know a lot, but we listen to them in periods when they themselves don't know very much, which is a bit of a paradox. So maybe Africa is better suited to this situation than we people in the West from a psychological point of view too, not only from the three reasons that.
Professor, I can even tell you to confirm what you are saying. I can even tell you that we from Cameroon, two of us, there's a professor of medicine who is a specialist in virology. His name is Professor K. And me and myself, we were able to have 2 articles published in 2 months in the Lancet. I think you know the Lancet, which is the #1 medical journal in the world. From Cameroon, we were able to publish 2 articles on the pandemic and on HIV. So it shows that there is a thirst for new opinion, new ideas, which take into consideration not only the medical approach, which my colleague provides, but also I provided the political, sociological, and psychological approach, and we blended it into 2 articles, which were published. You can look at the Lancet of last month and the last Lancet of 2 months ago and last month. You will see our names and our articles there. So, which is, I'm sure, in normal times, very difficult to do.
Okay, so everybody publish on COVID, you see, so we're at least trying to do seminars on it, yeah, and lots of talks, which I hope will go viral in a non-dangerous way.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Because if there's not, then I want to thank you very much for your insights. I want to thank all the students who have come to the seminar and asked questions. And I want to thank all of the general public who listen and look at us.
Yes, my good.
Thank you very much.
And to you. Thank you so much, Professor Norbert.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.